Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 10 of Opening Basics. Today we're going to take a look starting a new opening, the English opening. And before I get started on it, I wanted to take a moment out to give credit to my sources. So the main sources I've been using for this opening series, in addition to just my own general knowledge, are the database that came with the Fritz 12 chess program and the chess engine known as Stockfish 5. So starting with the engine, the Stockfish 5 engine is an open source engine which is free, and it's currently one of the top chess engines, so very latest and greatest. The database from Fritz 12 is not the latest. I think Fritz 14 is the most recent version, but it's still quite a solid database. Has maybe 200,000 games in it, but they've been selected, and I think it gives you pretty accurate view of the openings. And I'm not trying to be cutting edge of opening theory. I'm just trying to impart basic knowledge about the openings. So I think it's good enough for this purpose. And then, as I said, I use my own knowledge and experience. And when I get into an opening like the English, I need to supplement this with a little bit of book knowledge. And so I have a couple books that I use as reference. And one of them I wanted to mention in particular is Understanding the Chess Openings by Sam Collins. So Sam Collins, who wrote the book, is an international master from Ireland. This book was written in 2005. There may be more recent versions out now. It's not a huge book. A lot of opening books are like monster tomes, but this is about 220 pages. And it covers all the major openings, I should say. So it doesn't, it talks about the E4 openings, the D4 openings, and English and other openings. So it's not going to have the same kind of detail you'd have in one of the larger books, but it's a real great book for giving you an overview of all the different openings, particularly the ones that are mainly played today. And he has a lot of text, so it gives kind of a verbal introduction to each of the openings, which is nice to read. The one caution I have on this book is he's quite opinionated, and I don't necessarily agree with all his opinions. Sometimes he'll end off a line and just say, well, one side is better here, and it's not clear at all, really, that one side is better or the other, to me anyway. So I would take his opinions with a grain of salt, but his selection of the openings and his introductions to them are really terrific. And so if you're just looking for a guide, an overall guide to the openings, I can recommend that. And then the second book I use is more of a reference book. It's not a book you can read, but it's a book you can look up openings in, and it's well known. It's called Modern Chess Openings. I have version 14, or the 14th edition, they call it. I think the 15th edition is out now, so probably if you bought it, you would get that one. And what it is, it's a much larger book. And it has tables of different opening lines, and then accompanying each table is a series of notes. So it gives the opening line, and it gives comments about various positions that arise and games where this particular line has been played. And before each new opening, and the beginning of each chapter, there's a little bit of text, but not very much. So it's not the kind of book you can just read, but it's a great book as a reference book. You can, particularly after you've played an opening and you want to understand more about how you should have played differently, you can go and look up the line in that book and find it, and find a little bit of text about it, as well as the main lines from that point forward. So a useful reference, probably something that belongs in every chess player's library. Okay, so let's get on to the content of this video, which is the English opening, starting with the move c4. Now the English, unlike, say, the d4 and the e4 openings, you're not immediately going after the center. And as a result, your pieces don't immediately come into conflict with the other side. And so there are fewer forcing lines. So just in general, studying the English and learning about the English is more about learning particular positions that you want to get to, particular setups, and less about specific lines. I play this, he plays that. So I'm going to show a setup in this video. We're starting out with the four knights variation, it's called. But just keep in mind that there's a lot of different ways to get to the same position. So in this case, I'm going to choose the move e5 here, but like I said, we could also end up in the same position, for example, from knight f6 or perhaps even knight c6. But e5 is a very logical move. White has put a pawn here, influencing the d4 square, but he hasn't placed a pawn on either e4 or d4, so he's given up the center in a way, and so black is saying, well, if you don't want the center, I will take it. And now notice that, if we back up, notice that d4 is not considered a good move here. White will just take it, and when you take back, white can gain a tempo. In fact, there is an interesting way to play this if you want to try this and kind of surprise your opponent. You can play this like a gambit, where he takes and then you play c6. Or you can play knight f6 and try and round it up that way, like similar to a center counter. But in general, that's not considered the best way to play. And the main moves here are knight moves, either the knight moves, pawn moves, but e5, like I said, is a very logical move, and that leads to the first setup that I wanted to talk about in this series on the English. So after the pawn comes out, knight to c3 is a logical follow-up developing move, just focusing on the light squares. And in general, in all of the, I can't say all, in most of the variations of the English, this d5 square is really a focus for white's pieces, and a lot of English opening can be understood as a fight, of white trying to establish dominant control of the d5 square. Okay, so black can counter that with the knight f6, just trying to put some back pressure on those squares. Now knight f3, knight c6, and so this is, let's go and put on the next move, g3. So this is the four knights variation, and that's the setup I wanted to get to, and that's going to be the topic of this particular video in the series. So the four knight setup is very commonly reached from the English Open. It can be reached from different move orders, as I already mentioned. And black at this point has a number of different ways to proceed. So we're going to talk about all of them. First of all, let's point out that e5 is not a good move here because of knight g5. Very common trick in the English. So the fact that that white has neglected to stop this pawn from advancing doesn't mean that it's a good idea to advance it, because in a lot of lines white can now round up this pawn. In fact, d5, I guess, is an attempt to hold on to it, but this doesn't work out so well. And white gets an extra pawn. Now black has some compensation, so it's not a completely hopeless position, but nothing white should be afraid of. So the main moves here are, let's put them on the board, bishop to b4, kind of like a Rossolimo variation. This is sometimes called a reverse Sicilian, with the pawn on c4 and the pawn on e5. It's sort of the opposite of if white had played e4 and black had played c5. So it's like a Sicilian with the colors reversed. So let's go back to the top moves. The top moves are bishop b4, which if the colors were reversed, this would be like a Rossolimo Sicilian. Another move here is d5, going for something comparable to an open Sicilian. Another move here is knight to d4, this move. And the fourth move here is bishop to c5, which is pretty interesting because those last two moves are not very popular in the mainline Sicilian with the colors reversed, and also in the main Sicilian with the colors reversed, the move d5, or d4 would be in that case, is more popular than the bishop moves. But in this case, the bishop move is more popular. So let's take a look at bishop c5 first. Now this is not normally played in the Sicilian with the colors reversed, because the idea is that white, whoever's the opposing player, can get a tempo on this bishop. It's a bit vulnerable there and can be attacked with d4, but not right away. It takes some time to build up to it. So normally play continues with just developing the bishop, indirectly influencing this d5 square we're talking about. d6, just setting up a closed formation here. d3, also castles is possible there. And h6, so eliminating the possibility. d3 opened up this line for the bishop, so h6 eliminates that pin. And so we get a typical closed Sicilian type of setup with the colors reversed. This Bishop is still potentially a bit vulnerable, but it's going to take some time for white to build up some pressure and kick it. So this is an okay position for black, but it's also okay for white. And it leads to a kind of a long struggle. So let's go back. Maybe castles right here actually is a little more accurate than for black, rather than playing h6. h6 was a little bit passive there. And allowing the pin. And what can white play? White can play castles or a3 here as well, castles. Anyway, so the game can continue from here. And it's a slight edge to white, but nothing great. So let's go back. Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning and put on the first few moves. So c4, e5, just to get used to it. Knight c3. Keep in mind when you're playing the English, you're focused on this square on d5, so that helps coordinate your pieces. You're going to follow up typically with g3 and bishop here. But we're looking at the four knights variation here. So first, after this move, you put the knight out, hitting the pawn, and black defends it. So that's all very logical. Once again, it's a little premature to push the pawn. You just play knight g5 and round it up. So g6, a very logical way to play. And then we looked at bishop c4. Another way to play here is with d5. So let's check this out. And pawn takes is almost always played. So you get this exchange in. White is happy to open up, and he's gotten rid of the pawn that could occupy the d5 square. So he really has a lot of control over it. He's going to move this knight out of the way and chase this knight back. And in fact, this knight usually moves away voluntarily, then castles. And bishop e7, black needs to get that bishop out of the way to enable castling for himself. And then a3. So looks like going for a little bit of queenside expansion is a possible move here. Also d3 is a move, or rook to b1, also preparing for queenside expansion, and play could continue here. The chess engine is actually suggesting d4. This is not in the database, so maybe this is a bit too simple. It looks like the idea here is not to take right away, but to round up the pawn with knight b5. But after bishop f6, yeah, the chess engine changed its mind, rates this position as about even. So that is a way you can play, and you eventually round up the pawn, but it leaves you about in an even position. So a little bit slower moves here are probably in order, a3, d3, just gradually building up your position and hoping at some future point to exploit, not that diagonal, and to exploit this diagonal, and maybe use these pawns to kick around these knights over here. So that's a way to play. Let's back up. Okay, this is our position in the four knights. It's black's turn to move. And so we looked at bishop c5, we looked at d5, and now let's look at knight d4, another interesting choice. It's black in this variation is just trying to reduce some of the force. He's going to trade off this knight. Typically white just keeps developing, and then black grabs the knight. That was a little quick. Black grabs the knight, and it comes with a check, so it needs to be taken. And maybe black is going to try and exploit the position of this bishop. Seems a little bit exposed, but there's nothing immediate to be done. So just bishop b4. And now white has the interesting move, queen b3. So white in this line can defend the knight and avoid the exchange and the doubling of pawns. And then the bishop typically drops back to c5. It's interesting we get this bishop c5 in, and in this position white can castle or can play d3. And we get a similar kind of play as to what we saw with the earlier bishop c5 line. Just that in this line white has already got some continuing pressure on the b7 square, and so white's a little better in this line. So, black did manage to eliminate one pair of pieces, so it's a way to get rid of some of the force on the board. One pair of knights. Okay, so that leads us to our last move, which is actually the most popular in this position. And like I said, it's a bit surprising. The moves that are most popular in the reverse Sicilian are ones that are sometimes considered sidelines in the main Sicilian. So there's two ways to play it. Similar to lines in the Sicilian, you can play knight d5 and go after the bishop immediately and not allow the doubling of pawns. But the most popular and maybe the best way to play is to play bishop to g2, just allowing get the bishop on the good diagonal and allowing this bishop to take over here and just being happy with the bishop pair. Castles, it's a move, then castles. And now e4. So this is a position where, that's why I wanted to show this line in contrast to the other line. This is a position where black gets in e4. He's kicking the knight. The knight is going to go to g5 as usual, but now he can take the other knight, and so he can save this pawn. So b pawn takes is usually played to get more center influence, so taking towards the center. And now rook to e8. So that's the idea. He's killed off one of the defenders or attackers on the e4 square, leaving only these two pieces, the knight and the bishop, and he's defending with a rook and a bishop. And this is an okay position. The chess engine really likes queen c2 here, putting more pressure on this pawn and making it a little bit difficult to hold on to it. Although I guess queen e7 could be played, or d5 are responses that black has. And he can try and maintain this pawn here. He's also inflicted some damage with the doubled pawns, but white does have the bishop pair, and play will continue from here. Queen c2 is a rare move in the opening database. Actually, the most common move in the opening database is f3 here, which looks like a really ugly move, although I guess takes is pretty much forced because no, e3 is a possibility too, yeah. e3 is the pawn sack, and in this position, white's got some ugly pawns, but he's got an extra pawn, and he's probably doing okay. He could even ignore this and play d3 and round up the pawn later. And that's probably the best way to play, because this is a weak pawn that's eventually going to be rounded up, and white's pawn structure is a little stronger. So black normally takes here, and that's the recommended move by the chess engine as well. And then the knight can come back. The knight was feeling a bit stranded out there, but that exchange gave it a home. And this position is about equal, so once again, there's chances for both sides. White has some funny doubled pawns over here, but he has the possibility to expand later in the center. He's got an extra center pawn compared to black, and he has a pair of bishops. Black, on the other hand, has the more harmonious pawn structure. He's got actually a perfect pawn structure. There are no weaknesses, although eventually he's going to have to move his d pawn or his b pawn to allow his bishop out. Actually, yeah, d5 is the move that's normally played here, just getting going in the center and opening up a line for the bishop. And it's about an even position after d5. So typical line would continue d5, pawn takes, queen takes. And I guess I can leave it here. The queen is the target here to a tempo move by the knight, but there's no dangerous tempo move from the knight. The queen can just retreat back. And black has open lines. There's an open center, which white might attempt to colonize, I guess, at some point. But black has good piece development here and an open line for his bishop, so he's not going to have any particular difficulty. So anyway, I will leave it there. That concludes this introductory episode to the English opening. Let's go back just to the beginning. So let's just look at those four moves, up to move 4 again. So it's c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6. So the 4 knights variation, and g3, the most common response. And then we have the 4 most common replies from black are the 2 bishop moves, bishop to c4 or bishop to b5, bishop to b4 or bishop to c5, the knight move, knight to d4, and the pawn move, d5, just going for a reverse open Sicilian. And all of them are playable and lead to interesting games. So check them out sometime. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will be back in the next video with another setup I want to talk about in the English opening. See you then. Bye.